The slap wasn't the worst part. The silence that followed was. On her wedding day, my daughter-in-law slapped me across the face in front of 130 guests. That was the moment everything changed. My glasses shattered on the ballroom floor, but it was my son's silence that truly broke me. Imagine being humiliated by your daughter-in-law in front of your entire family on her wedding day. That's exactly what happened to me. They thought I was just a poor, fragile widow. Tonight, they'll discover who I really am. The ballroom froze in silence when my daughter-in-law slapped me. None of them knew they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. She slapped me for refusing to hand over my apartment keys. What she didn't know was that apartment was the least valuable thing I owned. My son's wedding turned into my public humiliation. But what came next left the entire room in shock. They wanted my home. What they didn't know was that I had the power to take away everything they had. I was humiliated, betrayed, and cast aside. But in 30 minutes, the truth would make them regret every word, every slap, every silence. The slap came so fast, I didn't have time to react. My glasses went flying, shattering on the elegant ballroom floor as 130 guests watched in absolute silence. My cheek burned, but the pain in my chest was far worse. Juliet, my daughter-in-law, had just slapped me on her wedding day because I refused to hand over the keys to my apartment. That's what you get for being so selfish, she screamed at me in front of everyone. A woman your age doesn't need so much space. The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved to help me as I crouched down, trembling, to pick up my broken glasses. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered among themselves. But no one, absolutely no one, dared to defend the poor old mother-in-law who had just been publicly humiliated. My son Ethan stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor as if I were invisible. "You're not welcome here anymore," Juliet continued, smoothing her pristine wedding gown. "Ethan and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better." Her words were pure venom. For months, I had endured her condescending comments about my worn-out clothes, my old car, my simple life. But this had crossed a line that should never have been touched. I rose slowly, feeling all eyes on me like sharp daggers. Tears streamed down my face, but inside, something had changed forever. That slap wasn't just a physical blow. It was the final straw. For years, I had kept a low profile, living with humility and discretion. I had secrets no one, not even my own son, knew. Memories of the last few months began to bombard my mind as I slowly walked toward the exit. I remembered when Juliet first came to my apartment 2 years ago. Her face fell when she saw my modest home, my old furniture, my small kitchen. "Seriously? This is where Ethan's mom lives?" she had asked him, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. From that moment on, every visit had been a silent torture. You should move to a smaller place," she had told me 3 months ago during a family dinner. "At your age, you can't maintain such a big apartment. Besides, Ethan and I are thinking of having kids soon. We'll need more space." Her fake smile didn't fool anyone, except my son, who seemed to lose his personality whenever she spoke, acting like a puppet on a string. The humiliations had escalated gradually. First, it was the comments about my clothes. "Aurora, don't you have anything more modern to wear?" Then it was about my car. "That car is so old. It's dangerous for you to drive that." Next, it was my part-time job at the local flower shop. "I don't understand why a woman your age is still working instead of relaxing." Each phrase was a small poison dagger stabbing at my self-esteem. My name is Aurora Hughes. I am 68 years old, and all my life I have been a woman who prefers discretion over ostentation. I work at a small flower shop 3 days a week. I drive a 10-year-old car. I buy my clothes at discount stores. To the outside world, especially to Juliet, I am just a middle-class widow living on a fixed income. But that's exactly the image I have carefully cultivated for decades. What none of those people looking at me with pity knew was that my life had been completely different before my husband passed. My husband, Robert, had not been the office worker everyone believed. We had made a conscious decision to live modestly, to keep our true wealth a secret, to protect our family's privacy in a way that I now understood had been prophetic. As I walked out of the ballroom, the guests' conversations followed me like a toxic cloud. "Poor thing, she looks so fragile," whispered Juliet's aunt. "The bride is right. That woman can't take care of herself anymore," added Ethan's cousin. "She should be in a retirement home, not living alone," another guest commented with false compassion. Each word was like acid pouring on open wounds. The cool temperature of the ballroom's air conditioning contrasted sharply with the suffocating heat in my chest. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my cell phone in my worn black purse, a purse I had used for 5 years, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because I had learned to value practicality over appearances, something my daughter-in-law would clearly never understand. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't used in over a year because I had naively hoped it would never be necessary. Carlos, it's Aurora. I need you to come to the Royal Oaks Ballroom immediately. Yes, right now. Bring the documents you know about. It's time for them to know the truth. My voice trembled, but there was a firmness in it I hadn't felt in a long time. Are you sure, Mrs. Hughes? Carlos asked with his professional but concerned voice. Once we do this, there's no turning back. I glanced back at the ballroom one last time, where I could see Juliet laughing with her friends, likely telling them how she had put her useless mother-in-law in her place. Ethan was by her side, smiling weakly, showing not a single ounce of remorse for what he had just witnessed. Completely sure, I replied. 30 minutes, Carlos. No more. I hung up the phone and walked toward my car with determined steps. For the first time in years, I was going to drop the mask I had used to protect my family. For the first time, they were going to meet the real Aurora Hughes. And when that happened, when reality hit their perfect, fake worlds, they would understand the true meaning of the word regret. The parking lot was quiet, lit by streetlights that cast long shadows between the cars. I sat in my old sedan and waited 30 minutes for their lives to change forever. 30 minutes for them to discover they had made the biggest mistake of their lives by humiliating the woman who had secretly been taking care of them more than they could ever imagine. While I waited in my car, memories of how I had reached this moment began to flood my mind like an unstoppable avalanche. It had all started exactly 2.5 years ago, when Ethan came to my apartment with that nervous smile I knew so well from when he was a boy. Mom, I want you to meet someone very special, he had told me. And there she was, Juliet, with her perfectly styled hair, her designer clothes, and that smile that didn't reach her eyes. From the very first moment, I knew something wasn't right. The way she looked at my apartment, evaluating every corner with thinly veiled disdain, told me everything I needed to know about her intentions. How cozy, she had murmured as she looked at my secondhand furniture and my sun-faded curtains. Her tone suggested the opposite. Ethan, completely blinded by what he believed was love, didn't notice the condescension in her voice. That first dinner had been a silent disaster. Juliet barely touched the food I had lovingly prepared, claiming she was watching her figure. When I asked her about her family, she gave evasive answers, but not before asking me about my financial situation with a curiosity that I found alarming. And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Aurora? It must be hard to get by on so little money, she had said with fake concern. What Juliet didn't know was that I had been observing her as much as she had been observing me. Over the next few months, I began to notice patterns that put me on high alert. Every time they visited my apartment, she would make comments about how outdated everything was, about how I deserved something better in my golden years. But her eyes always lingered on the details that really mattered. The prime location of the building, the panoramic view from my balcony, the size of the rooms. One day, while Ethan was in the bathroom, I heard her speaking softly on the phone in my kitchen. Yes, Mom. His mom's apartment is in a super expensive area. If I can get her to move to a smaller place, we could stay here until we have our own place. She's so naive she'll probably even thank us for helping her with the transition. Her words cut through me like a knife, but I maintained my composure when she returned to the living room, feigning innocence. From that moment on, every interaction with Juliet became a carefully orchestrated performance on both our parts. She played the concerned daughter-in-law, worried about her mother-in-law's well-being, while I pretended to be the vulnerable old woman who needed guidance. But inside, I was gathering information, observing her moves, understanding her true motivations. It was like a game of chess where we both thought we were winning. The following months brought a gradual escalation in her attempts at manipulation. First, there were the subtle suggestions. Aurora, I've seen some lovely apartments for people your age, with all-inclusive services and no maintenance worries. Then came the more direct pressures. You can't keep living alone at your age. It's dangerous. What if you fall and no one finds out for days? Each argument was designed to make me feel incompetent and helpless. Ethan, my own son, began to echo the same phrases like a trained parrot. Mom, Juliet is right. Maybe it would be better for you to consider moving to a more manageable place. Seeing him gradually transform into that woman's puppet was more painful than any direct insult. The son I had raised with so much love and sacrifice now saw me as an obstacle to his happiness. The psychological campaign intensified after they announced their engagement. Visits became more frequent, but also more tense. Juliet had started bringing real estate magazines and brochures for senior communities. I'm just exploring options for you, Aurora. I want to make sure you have the best quality of life possible, she would say, spreading the materials on my coffee table as if it were a business negotiation. But I had been doing my own research. One afternoon, when they went out to run wedding errands, I decided to call an old friend who worked in real estate. Amelia, I need you to investigate something for me, I told her. There's a couple who are very interested in my apartment, and I want to know more about their real financial situation. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. Juliet and Ethan were neck-deep in debt. The wedding they were planning cost more than $50,000, completely financed with credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they were renting was on the verge of eviction for non-payment. The luxury cars they drove were financed with payments they couldn't afford. Their lifestyle was a facade built on suffocating debt. Everything started to make sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that had united this couple. It was the desperate need to find a solution to their financial problems. And my apartment, located in one of the most exclusive areas of the city, was their lifeline. The revelation hit me like a slap to the soul. My son, the boy I had raised with values of honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. He had allowed an ambitious woman to convince him to see his own mother as a resource to be exploited instead of a person to be loved and respected. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. Aura, you can't keep being so selfish, Juliet had said to me just 3 days before the ceremony. Ethan and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with housing. Her words no longer even wore the mask of fake concern. It was a direct demand disguised as a family favor. That night, I had made a decision that would change everything. I called Carlos, my financial advisor, and the only man I had completely trusted since my husband Robert's death. Carlos, I need you to prepare some documents. It's possible I'll very soon have to reveal information I've kept secret for years. His voice had become serious immediately. Mrs. Hughes, are you sure this is the right time? He had warned me, with the wisdom of someone who had handled my affairs for more than a decade. Once this information is public, you can't take it back. The consequences could be devastating for family relationships. But I had already made up my mind. The family I had tried to protect with my silence had chosen to betray me. And now, sitting in my car in the ballroom parking lot, waiting for Carlos to arrive with the documents that would change everything, I realized the moment of truth had come. 25 more minutes, and Juliet, Ethan, and all those guests who had looked at me with pity would discover who Aurora Hughes really was. 25 more minutes, and their perfect worlds, built on lies and greed, would crumble like sandcastles. The night breeze rustled the tree leaves around the parking lot, creating dancing shadows under the lights. It was strangely poetic that, on such a beautiful night, so many illusions were about to die forever. 20 minutes had passed since my call to Carlos, and every second felt like an eternity. From my car, I could see the golden lights of the ballroom, hear the cheerful music and laughter spilling out of the open windows. It was surreal to think that in just a few minutes, that celebration would turn into a nightmare for the main players. I closed my eyes and let the most painful memories of the last few months flood my mind. I needed to remember exactly why I had reached this point of no return. The biggest humiliation had happened just 2 weeks before the wedding, during what Juliet had called an important family meeting. She had arrived at my apartment accompanied not only by Ethan, but also by her parents, a perfectly planned ambush. Aurora, We want to talk to you about your future. Juliet's mother, a haughty woman who looked at me as if I were a bothersome insect, had begun. We believe it's time for you to make responsible decisions about your life, continued Juliet's father, a burly man who had surveyed my apartment with the eyes of an appraiser evaluating a property. At your age, living alone in such a big place is not only unnecessary but dangerous. What if you have a medical emergency and no one finds out for days? Their words were rehearsed, too perfect to be spontaneous. Ethan had remained silent throughout the conversation, nodding occasionally like a well-trained puppet. Seeing him there, sitting next to a family that treated me like an obstacle, was like watching the son I had raised die before my eyes. "Mom," he finally said, in a voice I no longer recognized. "They're right. Juliet and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you moved to a place more appropriate for your age." Appropriate for my age, I repeated silently, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me. And who gets to decide what's appropriate for me? You? Juliet's mother exchanged a knowing look with her husband, as if my words had confirmed something they had already discussed. "Aurora, we understand this can be difficult to accept, but you must think about what's best for Ethan and Juliet," she said smoothly. "What's best for them?" I murmured, beginning to understand the true dimension of the conspiracy that had been woven behind my back. "And I suppose my apartment would be perfect for them to start their married life, right?" The awkward silence that followed my question was all the answer I needed. They had planned every detail of this conversation, every argument, every ounce of psychological pressure. Juliet took control at that moment, deploying her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. "Aurora, it's not just about the apartment. It's about your well-being. We've been doing research, and we found a wonderful residence for people your age. It has 24-hour medical services, social activities, prepared meals. You could make friends with people who understand what you're going through." Her fake smile made me nauseous. "What I'm going through?" I asked, feigning confusion. "And what exactly do you think I'm going through, Juliet?" She looked at Ethan for support before answering. "Well, loneliness, financial uncertainty, the fear of not being able to take care of yourself. It's normal at your age, Aurora. You don't have to be ashamed of needing help." The audacity of this 28-year-old woman telling me what was normal at my age left me speechless for a moment. But then I saw something in her eyes that chilled me, the absolute certainty that she had a right to my life, my home, my decisions. To her, I was no longer a person with autonomy but an obstacle to be removed with as little resistance as possible. "We've run the numbers," Juliet's father continued, pulling out a folder they had clearly prepared in advance. "The cost of the residence would be approximately $2,500 a month. With the sale of your apartment, you'd have enough money to cover it for many years, and there would still be some left over too. Well, to help Ethan and Juliet with their initial marriage expenses." There it was, the naked, raw truth. It wasn't about my well-being or my safety. It was about money. It was about converting my home into cash to finance their unsustainable lifestyle. "And if I refuse?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "Aurora," Ethan said, his voice sounding rehearsed, "we hope it won't be necessary to take more drastic measures. But if your mental health deteriorates to the point that you can't make rational decisions..." The implicit threat was crystal clear. If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they would seek legal ways to declare me incompetent. They had done their research. They had planned. They had prepared the ground to take everything I owned by force if necessary. The son I had raised with so much love was sitting right there, allowing strangers to threaten his own mother. That night, after they left with my firm refusal, I cried for the first time in years, not out of sadness, but for the definitive death of the illusions I had held about my family. I had called Carlos immediately. "I need you to investigate something urgently," I had told him through tears. "I want to know exactly what the real financial situation is for my son and his fiancée. Everything. Debts, income, liabilities, everything." The results of that investigation had been devastating. Ethan earned $45,000 annually as a sales manager, but had debts of more than $80,000 on credit cards. Juliet worked part-time as an image consultant, making maybe $4,000 a year, but spent as if she had an executive salary. Together, they owed more than $120,000, not counting the loans they had taken out for the wedding. The apartment they rented for $2,000 a month was 3 months behind on payments. The cars they drove were financed with payments that took up 60% of their combined income. Their main credit card was maxed out, and they had started using cash advances to pay other debts. They were in a financial freefall, and my apartment represented their only hope of salvation. But there was something else in Carlos's report that had completely broken my heart. For the past 6 months, Ethan had been regularly calling banks and insurance companies, asking about loans against his elderly mother's property. He had been asking about legal procedures to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been planning my systematic dispossession for months. The most painful information had come at the end of the report. According to a private investigator Carlos had hired, Juliet had been telling her friends that she had sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older, less attractive man because his mother had valuable properties and no competitive heirs. To her, marrying Ethan wasn't love. It was a strategic investment in my estate. That revelation had been the final straw. For weeks, I had considered simply revealing my true financial situation to them, thinking that maybe the shock would make them reconsider their behavior. But after reading that report, I understood that it wasn't about money or desperation. It was about a pure, calculated greed that had corrupted my son until he was unrecognizable. The days leading up to the wedding had been torture. Every phone call from Ethan was a new pressure to reconsider my position. Every visit from Juliet included poisonous comments about my stubbornness and selfishness. They had started to treat me as if I were already a senile old woman whose opinions didn't matter. The night before the wedding, Ethan had made his last attempt. "Mom, tomorrow is the most important day of my life. Please don't ruin it by being difficult. Juliet just wants what's best for all of us." His words had been the final confirmation that I had lost my son forever. The man who was getting married the next day was no longer the boy I had raised with so much love and sacrifice. And now, sitting in my car waiting for Carlos, I realized that everything had led to this inevitable moment. It wasn't about revenge or cruelty. It was about justice. It was about showing them the consequences of their actions. It was about teaching them that some lines should never have been crossed. 15 more minutes, and everything would change forever. My hands trembled as I dialed the number for Joseph, my neighbor from the apartment next door, a 70-year-old man who had been a silent witness to all the tense visits of the last few months. "Joseph, it's Aurora. I need to ask you for a very important favor," I said, my voice shaking. "Could you go to my apartment and bring me the brown folder from the second drawer of my desk?" "Yes, right now. It's urgent." Joseph had been like a brother to me since Robert passed away, and I knew I could trust him without him asking questions. While I waited, I remembered the conversation I had with Joseph just a week earlier. He had witnessed from his balcony when Juliet arrived with a real estate appraiser without notifying me. "Aurora, that girl brought a man with a briefcase who was measuring your apartment from the outside," he had told me, concern obvious in his voice. "When they saw me, they left quickly. I don't like what's happening at all." Joseph had been the first to notice the subtle changes in Ethan's behavior over the last few months. "Your son doesn't greet me like he used to," he had observed. "He used to stay and chat with me when he came to visit. Now he rushes in and out as if he's ashamed of something." His words had confirmed what my heart already knew. I had lost my son long before the slap that night. The folder I had asked Joseph for contained documents no one in my family had ever seen: bank certificates, property titles, investment records that Robert and I had kept secret for decades. Documents that proved the poor widow living on a modest pension was actually a woman with enough resources to change lives with a single decision. 10 minutes later, Joseph appeared in the parking lot with the folder in his hands. "Aura, what's going on? You look very upset," he asked as he handed me the documents. "It has to do with Ethan's wedding." I explained briefly what had happened in the ballroom, and I saw his face harden with every detail. "That woman is a viper," he muttered. "I always knew it." "Joseph, in a few minutes a man named Carlos will arrive. When you see him, tell him I'm waiting for him here. I asked. And Joseph, after tonight, many things are going to change. I want you to know you have always been like family to me. His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. You're family to me too, Aurora. Do what you have to do. As Joseph returned to the building, I opened the folder and began to review documents I hadn't looked at in months. The first was a bank statement showing a balance of $5,400,000 in an investment account. The second was the property title for a downtown office building that generated $50,000 in monthly rent. The third was the deed to a beach house I had bought as an investment 10 years ago. Robert had been a genius at investments, starting with a small import business and turning it into a silent empire. Together, we had made the decision to live modestly to protect our privacy and our family's security. Visible wealth attracts problems, Robert used to say. Invisible wealth gives you power. I never imagined I would have to use that power against my own son. Each document in that folder represented years of hard work and smart decisions. The flower shop where I worked 3 days a week wasn't because I needed the money, but because I liked to stay active and connected to the community. The old car I drove wasn't due to economic limitations, but because I had learned that unnecessary ostentation only brings problems. My apartment, the one Juliet so coveted, was actually the least valuable property in my portfolio. I had bought it not for its economic value, but for the memories it held. It was where Robert and I had spent our last years together, where we had planned our future, where he had passed away in my arms after a brave battle with cancer. But there was something else in that folder that would change everything for Ethan and Juliet. For the last 3 years, since my son had started having financial problems, I had been secretly paying many of his debts. The credit card payments he thought came from a work bonus were actually coming out of my account. The special discount on his rent that he had negotiated with his landlord was money I transferred monthly. Without Ethan knowing, I had been subsidizing his irresponsible lifestyle for years. The luxurious apartment he lived in, the car he drove, even some of the expenses for the wedding taking place at that very moment had been made possible by my secret financial support. I had thought I was helping my son through a difficult time, not realizing I was financing his transformation into a person I didn't recognize. The bank records showed monthly transfers totaling $4,500 that had kept the sinking ship of Ethan's financial life afloat, money he thought came from work bonuses or tax refunds, when in reality it was his mother desperately trying to protect him from the consequences of his irresponsibility. The irony was devastating. While Juliet was humiliating me for being an economic burden on their future marriage, I was literally the only reason they could afford that marriage. While they were planning to strip me of my apartment to solve their financial problems, I had been solving those problems in secret for years. I closed the folder and looked toward the ballroom once more. The lights were still shining. The music was still playing. The guests were still celebrating. But in less than 5 minutes, Carlos would arrive with the final documents I needed. In less than 5 minutes, the process of cutting all the financial threads I had used to protect a son who had chosen to betray me would begin. This is not revenge, I reminded myself. This is justice. This is about teaching them that actions have consequences, that greed has a price, that family is not something you can sell for economic convenience. I had tried to protect Ethan from reality for too long, and that protection had corrupted him until he was unrecognizable. Headlights of a car approached the parking lot, illuminating the night with a white light that momentarily blinded me. It was Carlos, punctual as always, arriving with the documents that would change everything forever. I got out of my car and walked toward him, feeling how each step took me further away from the Aurora I had been and closer to the woman I needed to become. Mrs. Hughes, Carlos said as he got out of his car, a legal brief under his arm. Are you completely sure about this? Once we go in there will be no way to undo what is about to happen. I looked toward the ballroom one last time, where my son and his new wife were probably still celebrating their supposed victory over the useless old woman they had just humiliated. I have never been more sure of something in my life, Carlos. It's time for them to meet the real Aurora Hughes. Carlos opened his folder under the parking lot light and began to show me the documents he had prepared with his characteristic efficiency. Mrs. Hughes, Here is the order for the immediate suspension of all bank transfers you have been making in Ethan Hughes's name, he said, pointing to the first paper. Also, here is the notice of cancellation of the lease agreement that you had confidentially guaranteed. The landlord will receive this document tomorrow morning. I took the papers with trembling but determined hands. Each document represented a thread I had carefully woven for years to protect my son. And now I was cutting those threads one by one. And the payment for the ballroom? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Cancelled, Carlos confirmed. The deposit you had guaranteed will be withdrawn tonight. They will have until tomorrow to find an alternative form of payment. The magnitude of what I was about to do hit me like a cold wave. For 3 years, I had been the invisible safety net that had kept Ethan and Juliet's lives afloat. The apartment they lived in, the car he drove, even the wedding that was taking place at that very moment had all been made possible by my secret financial support. And now, in a single night, I was going to withdraw all that support, permanently. Carlos, I want you to understand something, I said as I signed each document with a determination I hadn't felt in years. This is not cruelty or revenge. This is the only way for them to learn the real value of things. For too long, I protected them from the consequences of their actions, and that protection corrupted them into people I don't recognize. I understand perfectly, Mrs. Hughes, Carlos replied, genuine respect in his voice. In my 30 years as a financial advisor, I have seen many families destroyed by greed and ingratitude. What you are doing requires more courage than most people possess. His words gave me the final strength I needed to take the last step. We walked together toward the ballroom entrance, and with each step, I could feel my heart beating faster. It wasn't nervousness I felt. It was a strange mix of sadness for what I had lost and anticipation for what I was about to regain. My dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being instead of as a resource to be exploited. The music stopped abruptly when we entered the ballroom. 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us, confusion etched across their faces. Some recognized Carlos immediately. After all, he had handled the financial affairs of several prominent families in the city for decades. His presence at social events usually meant something important, something serious, was about to happen. Juliet was the first to react. "What are you doing here, Aurora?" she shouted from the center of the dance floor, where she had been posing for photos with Ethan. And continued with the precision of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. Over the last 36 months, Carlos began consulting his documents. Mrs. Aurora, Hughes has transferred a total of $162,000 to cover the living expenses of her son, Ethan Hughes, and his fiancée. This includes $48,000 for rent payments, $44,000 for credit card payments, $18,000 for vehicle insurance, and $22,000 for miscellaneous expenses. A collective murmur swept through the ballroom. Some guests exchanged glances of astonishment. Others pulled out calculators on their phones to verify the figures. Juliet's mother, who had remained seated at the head table, throughout the confrontation, slowly stood up, her face completely pale. Furthermore, Carlos continued relentlessly. Mrs. Hughes personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, including the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photography, for an amount of $53,000. Money which, as I mentioned earlier, is no longer available to cover these expenses. Juliet finally found her voice, but what came out was more of a wail than coherent words. "This is impossible. It's a lie. No one can have so much money and live like a pauper." She turned to the guests as if looking for support, but found only fascinated faces, and some who were clearly amused by her desperation. "My dear Juliet," I said with a calm that contrasted dramatically with her hysteria, "you have just learned a very valuable lesson about judging people by appearances. For years, I chose to live simply because my husband, Robert, and I valued privacy above ostentation. It turned out to be a very wise decision." Ethan finally reacted, approaching me with hesitant steps. "Mom, please, there has to be an explanation." There has to be a way to resolve this. You can't destroy my life like this. His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I felt a pang of maternal pain that almost made me waver. Destroy your life, I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me again. I'm destroying your life. Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 130 people? Wasn't it you who stood by without saying a word while I was being humiliated? Wasn't it you who planned to strip me of my home? The truth of my words resonated in the ballroom like church bells. Several guests nodded, clearly remembering the scene that had started all this drama. Some even had videos on their phones of the slap Juliet had given me, digital evidence of the cruelty that had triggered this revelation. But that was different, Ethan muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. We didn't know. We didn't understand. We thought you really needed help. His excuses sounded pathetic even to himself, and I could see some guests exchanging looks of contempt. You didn't know? I asked, my voice rising. For the first time all night. You didn't know you were planning a family ambush to pressure me into selling my home. You didn't know you had brought a real estate appraiser without my knowledge. You didn't know you had been investigating legal ways to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate. With each question, Ethan's posture shrank. Carlos took advantage of the moment to pull another document from his folder. Mr. Hughes, I must also inform you that your mother has decided to amend her will. All assets that were previously designated for you to inherit have been redirected to charities dedicated to protecting seniors from family abuse. The impact of this declaration was like a silent explosion. Juliet staggered backward as if she had been physically hit. You can't do that, she shrieked, her mask of composure finally falling. Completely. We're your family. Ethan is your only son. You can't disinherit him. Over a stupid fight. A stupid fight? I repeated, letting the words hang in the tension-filled air. Is that how you describe a family conspiracy to strip an old woman of her home? Is that how you justify slapping your husband's mother on her own wedding day? My voice had turned icy, and I could see some guests flinch. Juliet's father, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally approached with an expression of poorly disguised panic. Mrs. Hughes, I think we're all a little upset by the emotions of the day. Maybe we could discuss this in private when things have calmed down a bit. His tone was that of a man who had just realized he had bet on the wrong horse. There's nothing to discuss in private, I replied firmly. Everything I had to say has been said here in front of the same people who witnessed my humiliation. You chose to make this public, so my response will be public. The guests' heads moved between us as if watching a tennis match, absorbed in every exchange. Carlos closed his folder with a dry snap that echoed throughout the ballroom. Mrs. Hughes, all documents have been delivered and explained. The legal effects will begin immediately. He turned to Ethan and Juliet with a professional expression, but not without a certain satisfaction. I suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible. Juliet finally collapsed. She literally dropped into a nearby chair and began to cry with uncontrolled sobs that echoed through the ballroom. Everything is ruined, she murmured through her tears. Everything we planned, everything we worked for. It's all destroyed. Her wedding dress, once immaculate, was now wrinkled and stained with tears. No, I said, approaching her for the first time since the slap. What's destroyed are the lies, the greed, and the lack of respect. What's destroyed is the illusion that you can treat people like objects and expect there to be no consequences. I stopped in front of her, forcing her to look up. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Ethan went to his wife and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. Juliet, we have to find a way to fix this. There has to be something we can do. But even as he spoke, I could see in his eyes that he knew it was too late. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. There is a way to fix this, Ethan, I said, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time in months without feeling pain. You can learn from this. You can grow from this. You can become the people I hoped you would be before greed corrupted you. My voice softened slightly, because despite everything, he was still my son. But that growth will have to happen without my financial help, without my apartment, and without my inheritance. Without my financial help, without my apartment, and without my inheritance. The words landed like a verdict. The ballroom went utterly silent again. No clinking glasses, no nervous shuffling, just 130 people holding their breath as if waiting for the echo of judgment to fade. Ethan's lips parted as though to speak, but nothing came out. His face was pale, his tie crooked, his posture collapsed. For the first time in years, he looked like a boy caught in the act of something shameful. Juliet's sobs turned into a high, broken laugh. "You'll regret this," she spat, mascara streaking her cheeks. "You think people will respect you after this little performance? They'll see you for what you are, spiteful, bitter, pathetic." I leaned forward just enough for her to meet my eyes.
"No, Juliet.
Tonight, they see you for what you are." A ripple of murmurs ran through the room, louder this time. Agreement, disbelief, admiration, fascination. Some guests even applauded softly, a scattered but undeniable sound that only made Juliet collapse deeper into her chair. Ethan dropped to one knee beside her, but his eyes stayed fixed on me. "Mom," he whispered.